As retailers entered the lockdown in March 2020, a small, diverse group of Canadian thought leaders gathered to virtually speculate, collaborate, and share their insights on the waves of disruption facing retailers. The Business of Retail podcast emerged as an unflinching strategic alternative to the conventional discourse, revealing challenges in the headlines and exploring new, unconventional paths for all facets of the retail industry. Now, here's the panel.
I'm Craig Patterson, and welcome to the Business of Retail podcast. We're joined here today with Gary Newbury, George Minikakis, Christine Cowan, and David Ian Gray. We're going to do a little bit of a retrospective of what's happened in 2020. We're going to discuss a few things that have changed. A bit of a focus is going to include the work from home situation that we've seen and how that's affecting retail in Canada and even beyond. So welcome, everyone.
Great.
Thanks, guys. I think this is an incredible topic for a lot of us, obviously, because we've all been affected by it. And I think, the incredible challenges we had this past year really opened up opportunities for us to think differently about some of the fundamental aspects of our life. Recently we've been seeing Twitter and Slack and Microsoft talking about the fact that they're going to let their employees work from home indefinitely. And, that really got me to think in some of these large corporations, the massive campuses they have. Adidas has one. In Germany, we've got massive spaces with Apple and Nike headquarters. And so, all these have been built out with this open workspace concept. Now we're not able to do that. People are working from home. What becomes of those massive campuses? I think there's a lot of opportunity in this, that it makes it possible for people to work remotely from any location, really. You could be based in Toronto and work for a Korean company. It just opens up also the ability to allow us to not necessarily have to live and work in that same downtown core. So we're seeing in New York, there's a 14% open office situation, and now they're talking about potentially converting those office spaces into condos or apartments. So that starts to change the landscape of cities and, the cost savings for companies when they're trying to relocate people to bring them to their headquarters. Now that's not necessarily the case anymore. People can work and live wherever they want. They don't have to commute. So there's just a massive opportunity, I think, here, environmentally changing, culturally changing, and then just financially, the opportunity for companies to not have to necessarily spend all this money to build these massive campuses. And I think now the other challenge is how they convert those campuses to make them safe environment for people if they do want to come back. So I think this work from home situation is just so far reaching and can, definitely kick us off into some interesting conversations. So I'll pass it back to you guys for your thoughts.
Well, you think about the environment, right? And think about the impact of not having to drive to work every day. But there are other environmental issues that come from that too. All those deliveries that are going to be made by all these couriers to all these homes, and the sheer number of boxes that I'm throwing out every couple of weeks just to keep up with it is rather insane. But I believe that the public is getting comfortable. Workers are getting comfortable with being at home because the quality of life has improved. Because if you think about an hour and a half, I think I read once somewhere the average commute was 90 minutes to get to work and home. I mean, that's 3 hours of your day gone, but you've just gained it back. And what are you going to do with that? Right? You're going to take a course. You're going to go to the gym. Right? There's a quality of life issue here that's actually improved. And I think that this perpetuates a lot more opportunities than risks, for retailers, and it changes the dynamic of central business districts the way they used to exist.
George, I like your point about the opportunities. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I know, for example, in downtown Vancouver, there's a lot of closures of restaurants and lunch counters and even stores in the core. They tended to be pretty high rent spots anyway, and then without the daytime weekday traffic, they're just dying. But your point, if people are residential, particularly in many Canadian cities, I don't think the cities have zoned properly some of those suburban communities that they could be truly mixed unless there are new builds. And I think what might be an opportunity if cities move quickly is to create a rebirth of opportunities for kind of local business that are there to support clusters of home-based workers, and where it doesn't exist already adjacent to them. And that could be really interesting. So it might be a shifting of where retail is, not a demise of retail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what came to mind for me was just, European cities. And in many of those cases, you're living in a city hub in an apartment, and you go out to the piazza and there's an open space where you can have, meals. There's vendors out there. They've got like open air markets and things like that. And I think that could be a really interesting resurgence because if you're living in that place and you don't necessarily have to drive to go to your big box store, all of a sudden you can daily go down and get your food and have a nice meal and go to a bar or restaurant, go to your local shops. And I think there could be an opportunity around that for some of these larger cities where the downtown core really is this sort of business hub. And then on the weekends, it's sort of dead. And I know we've had that for years and years where you sort of have that challenge. So it's just an interesting concept because everyone's sort of been moving out of the city because of the cost factor. Does this change that paradigm and allow people to maybe move closer to the downtown core without having to commute as much? Could be an interesting.
And moving closer to how Europeans view work, right? Because Europeans view work very differently. They work to live. They don't live to work. But North Americans live to work, and it's a fact. It's what we do. But they in Europe the job is not everything. The job is a means to live and experience life. Versus what do we have to do here? You're going to work hard, save, get older, retire. Hope you saved enough to retire, pay off your mortgage, and then sell off your home to retire in one of those retirement homes. God forbid now, but. I think that's there's a difference here, and it could lead to multi-family homes, where multi-generational family homes that already exist quietly, but I can see that taking root because it makes more sense. Affordability being one of them.
Yeah,
I think what the discussion is talking about is a change in cost structures, about how, say, for instance, retailers think about their campuses they used to have, and how if they push people to wherever they live, as opposed to demanding they come in. So when they used to come in, they used to have a kind of a social dimension to this. You hang around, you create creativity things going on, new ideas, whatever it might be. But now you're in your, as Jackie said in the previous podcast, you're in your little silo at home. How do you manage that? So there's some contextual things about how retailers have to adjust to this, where they have to start really trusting their people under these circumstances. I think that everyone's just got their head down. But as this becomes a more of a way of life, then other things come into play. But I think the important thing is the social dimension. How do people who are now working from home, how do they get that social dimension? You can sit on Zoom all day. My personal thing is, yeah, sure, you can generate a certain degree of that, but is your social dimension that you used to get at work, is that now going to be in your community, in your, to the places you described there, in your open area restaurants and malls and stuff like that? Is that where you go to get that social dimension now on a sort of Monday to Friday basis?
And does HR rate more highly introverts from here on out because they're going to be more adaptive to the situation? I don't know, right?
There could be something that comes out of this around the creativity space. Like, I think people can be more productive sometimes working from home because, definitely you've got your meetings and stuff, but coming from my corporate world, you could be in a meeting, every single day back to back, and then you're having conversations out in the hallway, et cetera. And so like getting the meat of the work done often would happen before or after hours when you're done with your meetings. So I think what's nice is it allows people to tailor their schedules. And I think we were starting to see that before this hit us, where companies were more open to people doing flex hours. So if you're more productive in the morning, you come in the morning, you leave early. If you're more productive in the afternoon, you sort of schedule your life around that. Or there were work from home days where people could actually take that. So it was a 20% work from home. So I think this was already sort of happening. And I think with the younger generation, it's really something that they value in a company, and they look towards that, and that ability to have some flexibility in their lives. And then I think on top of that, it just allows us potentially more time to get outside, get in nature, meet up with our friends, go do our physical activities. To George's point, we're not having to commute a lot. So all that time savings allows us maybe to be more flexible, more productive, and still be able to get out and do other things in our day-to-day life that might have been a challenge before.
When I think retail being a command and control culture, just, I'm making a very general point, but for the most part, I think has really struggled with the notion that you can trust people, that if they're not at a desk at a fixed location at 2 minutes to 9 in the morning and they're there until at least 5 o'clock, if not later, keeping an eye on when everyone else is leaving. If you don't have that set up, then you're not going to get anything out of your people. I think they're now realizing that's not true. In fact, probably if anything, a lot of people working from home are working even longer, George, to your point, like they're filling up those 3 hours with even more work. But that might be the start of, Christine, a good culture shift in the sector.
It is a paradigm, right? I mean, all of a sudden, everything that Tom Peters had written about the one man running $1 billion corporation has coming to fruition in this way, right? Because technology has translated that opportunity to happen. AI if as long as that continues to evolve in the right way, can provide you with a lot of data and strategic information that you at your fingertips that you might have had an army of people doing for you a long time ago, 10 years ago. That's a long time ago. And for me, maybe. But if you think about it, at the end of the day, it is a paradigm shift. And back to your point about retailing, right? I mean, how does retail change? Does the mall, does this move back into the burbs for workers? Does that give life to malls again? As long as they can reinvent themselves to cater to that mindset. And it's really unique concepts that are going to unfold over time. You can't predict all of them, but if work from home sticks, and I don't see how it's going to go back anytime soon, it's going to create new opportunities for old ideas, old concepts that we thought are dead. Maybe they're not.
Yeah, or a hybrid of, right? To your point, you're going to have that outlying populace that need the mall for all of the recreating and their day-to-day needs. Then maybe you have a shift more to like the downtown city core, if that becomes less price prohibitive for people to live down there and work there and walk around and not have to commute. And so then there's another environmental impact on that piece as well, where we're not in our cars and commuting on the train and having to deal with rush hour traffic. And so that's a quality of life opportunity for a lot of people that I think work from home brings.
Hey, Gary, what's your when you look back at 2020, what was your big moment?
I had a sort of a whole range of things that kind of occurred to me, but the biggest thing for me was when we got together originally back in March, and we started talking about, what does this all mean? How are retailers going to, what's the methodology that they could progress to make sure they're match fit for whenever this thing finishes? And we talked about just do it, transform boldly and quickly, and then sort of move to adapt. I think it was adapt and discard the old. And I when I talked to retailers in June, July time, they were very much on the just do it, getting the shelves full, getting the e-commerce up and running, doing click and collect and curbside. But they hadn't really given any thought as to what capabilities would be required for the future. So they were like going to bump into that because inevitably they would. Consumers have changed. This is for me and for many consumers an episodic discontinuity. So it's like a real thump in the head, and it's made them reset their expectations. So I hadn't heard too many organizations redoing or remodeling their proposition, making sure that e-commerce, if it's appropriate, e-commerce is fully embraced into the overall sales strategy of the organization, their proposition, their go-to-market situation. which is a bit scary, really, that we've got through 9 months of this. And all I'm seeing is that it's more of the same. For most brands, it's more of the same, which is very scary because we're going to go into 2021. If the great plan is we're hoping it will just return to normal somehow, the vaccine's going to help us all that, I just have to stand back and say, where in that last month were you thinking about the future as opposed to just doing the tactical things? Because often doing things makes us feel good, and it makes us feel we're adding value somehow just by doing rather than thinking. Because what's the outcome of thinking? Well, we might have a report on a desk that nobody looks at. So thinking is almost ethereal and may have less value attributed to it. But the other thing that goes alongside that is the culture. Well, if we think about, for me, they're inextricably linked in the sense that if we're not thinking about the future and the proposition, how it needs to look like, there's something fundamentally wrong with how we think, and that's cultural. If people in the organization are kind of bright and they're thinking about the future and think, oh, what about this? What about that? And they're getting suppressed in the organization. No, just do this. Just do what we know to be true, and we think we've been successful in the past. So I think that what I'd like to see as we go into 2021 is much more integration between, the proposition, how it looks, how it may need to be remodeled, what format we need to go to market with, and also the culture that is going to support that and kind of facilitate that movement to that position, and then to continue that going into the future. I think those are the two things that sort of stand out like a sore thumb for me.
Don't you think that was inevitable? Sorry, Christine, just I think there's an inevitability around that because, when we look at the data in April, May, when retail really fell off a cliff, sales just plummeted. I think people were more in survival mode rather than rebuild or reinvent mode. And I think the opportunity's there for sure, but I tend to think you're right. It probably will be now going into 2021, knowing that, hey, we got through maybe the worst of it even, and that who knows if that's true.
Yeah.
But maybe there's a little breathing space.
But for those people who, David, were working on transformational projects, to have those switched into just do it, the tactical firefight was potentially, when they look back at this stage, maybe a golden opportunity really missed. So all those transformational, all the technology they were banging in, but it wasn't going anywhere fast, the ROI that got, didn't materialize or got realized. If they just taken a small team, people very motivated, with a view as to what the future might look like, and therefore to take this technology or these processes or this approach, whatever it may have been, and twist it and turn it and make it work. If they haven't done that alongside the shelf filling, getting the e-commerce up and running, all those other tactical things, I think those organizations will stumble into 2021. And I think that would be very unfortunate, especially for our Canadian retailers, given the situation of things like lockdown and this essential, non-essential retailer situation. But one of the things I think that I kind of take away from it also is that the data that we used to have, and Jackie made this point, that we used to have in 10 years, 15 years of data, we've got to dump that. So what has made us not respond to these customer trends quickly enough? Is it a technology, or is it a paradigm thing that we've got stuck in our head, cultural driven, that says, well, surely it's kind of like it used to be with a little tweak, but the tweak's almost irrelevant or immaterial. So can't we just work a bit harder on this and it will come right?
David, I view the next for the first 6 months of 2021, I don't see them being pivotal in any way. I have to see a continuation of what we're into. If I use the data or the plan that the federal government has for rollout for inoculation, It's like 50 to 70% of the population will be inoculated, and maybe the same in the US by the early fall. I don't believe, and I've seen data that shows that consumers are not going to go back that quickly. So I'm saying, in my view, it may be a little darker. It is normally, but it's the truth. My point of view is this: you got a Band-Aid right now. The government has provided, some level of support. It's not the best. It's not everything. It doesn't mean that you're going to survive with it. You couldn't put meal on your table, and probably couldn't pay your house mortgage with it, because you have to take care of business first. But at the end of the day, when that is gone, and that's supposedly going to be gone by the summer of 2021, when that goes, because we have this preconceived notion that we're ready to get out there in full mode again, and the public doesn't show up, you've got some serious problems. And if business is not thinking that way right now and planning contingencies around that, you're walking right into a time bomb. You're walking into it, and I don't see how. I'm gonna. This is my issue for 2020. Is the government should have been far more transparent. All governments should have been far more transparent with the economic fallout of this virus and the impacts, and how businesses could have prepared a lot better for them going forward, as opposed to this idea we're almost out of it, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. That was BS from the very beginning. And there needs to be more transparency and responsibility going forward. I'm done.
So was that your reflection on 2020? That was kind of yours was
Yep.
What might have been had from a policy point of view, or communications, I guess, point of view.
They blew it.
Yeah.
Craig, you've been working on a number of things that you were telling us, and I know your list is massive, but what are your thoughts?
Oh God, I mean, 2020 was such a strange year. I think that we've seen, a real shift to online. That's one of the big things that we've seen so far. Consumers changing their spending patterns. We're seeing direct-to-consumer brands, for one reason or another, continuing. That's something you mentioned as well. Really becoming more prominent. In some cases out of necessity, because they were in multi-brand retailers that no longer had credit insurance. This has been an issue with a few retailers I've been talking to, including
Greg, are you picking one, or is your one like the Stephen Hawking thing, or
it's all encompassing? I mean, it's hard to pick one, but when we tie it back to sort of the work from home theme, I'm getting really worried about downtown retail. I'm an urbanist. I live downtown. I recently just moved. I stayed downtown. I could have gone to the suburbs, but I have agoraphobia. And so I stayed downtown. And, my fear, because, I've talked before in these podcasts, and I've talked about the history of retail, and I've talked about the department store. And I'm just worried we're going to see this decimated. A couple of weeks ago, we saw the Hudson Bay store in downtown Winnipeg close forever. It was already closed because of a lockdown, but they made it official in terms of not doing it in February as was planned. I'm just worried about the long-term outlook for urban retail and everything else that surrounds the economy, because when you look at these urban cores in these cities, they are extremely important to the economies of those entire regions, whether or not that be for retail or otherwise. And if we're seeing a mass suburbanization of our cities, which includes retail as well as the population, I see this as being incredibly scary for the downtown cores, because in many cases they were already going downhill. We will only have 3 fairly strong downtowns left in Canada. What's going to happen now? This is, I think, a terrifying situation. I mean, what's funny is, in a few years, Regina and Saskatoon might be the only cities that have strong downtowns, because their suburban centers haven't kept up with what's there, but the rest of the country has really strong malls in the suburbs. We've got big box retail as well that has really proliferated, and it's a huge concern for me right now.
Craig, that's an excellent point. Excellent point.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, when I think about downtown Toronto, though, I mean, think about like Hazelton Lanes and that whole area, like around behind the Mink Mile. I mean, that was sort of European city concept, small boutique shops, easy to get to, walkable from the downtown core. I mean, I completely agree with you, and that is a scary thought. But then I also think, what if that opportunity all of a sudden presented itself for more people to live within that downtown core area, if buildings were converted? then you have kind of a resurgence of that and the ability to walk and get around like you do in downtown Manhattan or in downtown Vancouver, minus the rain. But I think it could kind of go two ways. So I'm trying to be optimistic about it because I think there's just got to be a way for us to almost have the combination of the two.
Yeah, I hope so. I really, really hope so because, Yorkville, as you just mentioned, it's a great area, but the resident population being about, 15,000 people is not going to support what's there. We need a lot of parking spaces at this point because people are not going to take transit and they need to come. My thought again is there is a potential to densify and add people to the downtown cores, but that's going to take years, and we don't have years. We've got weeks or months. That's where we're at in retail because the financial cycle, is rapid and continuous, and this is just, potentially because of that and because of the obligations around interest rates and bank loans and everything else. When you look at the big picture, this could be catastrophic. I'm very worried about downtowns, and I'm a downtown booster, and I'm just like, oh my God, because I've been watching them going downhill, for the last few decades already, and no one's immune. Vancouver and Toronto have the strongest downtowns in Canada, and their resident populations. Vancouver is about 120,000, and Toronto has about 300,000. But we've also got about 6,000 condominium units for rent in downtown Toronto right now. I was checking this morning because I'm listing my old place. Incredible. We've never had, there was like maybe 300 before, and now it's 6,000.
Wow.
Well, Craig, you know what? Maybe there's an accelerator aspect to this too, which is if there's sort of a creative class that gets drawn into those urban settings, they don't, and maybe not with big families and all the other needs that take you to the burbs. Presumably, part of your attraction to those centers are the surrounding amenities. And if they disappear, maybe suddenly you go, why am I here? Why am I paying so much for where I live when maybe there are other options? So I could see it actually, it wasn't on my radar. So thanks for putting that one out there. But
And you know what, Craig, the sick part is the future's already here. We're already staring right at us.
Yeah.
In a mall yesterday, a fairly big mall, and I counted at least 30 empty stores. That to me was eye-opening. And I won't talk about the level of service and everything in the mall because it wasn't great, but I'll have to tell you that to me that was eye-opening. It's just that is a reflection of what we're staring at right now, and it's going to clean itself out, but it's going to take time.
How many stores would be in that mall? Roughly like 200. So we're looking at like a 15% vacancy rate.
Yeah.
Well, I think that what kind of brought everything home to me was back in, I don't know, it was about April time, that David was actually being interviewed on, I think it was CTV, and they went down, they took a car down Robson Street in Vancouver, and it was all boarded up. The only thing that was missing, a bit of tumbleweed, and it had been perfect for a set of like a zombie town. And I got the feeling that's what we're going to be facing in what was previously very busy, kind of active, community-driven kind of urban centres. And the only saving grace is maybe parts of that will be transmogrified into my local town, and maybe it will develop its own community-based shopping experiences and small retailers and maybe a couple of big box stores or whatever. But that was quite a graphic example of what it might look like in the future in these previously very busy kind of streetscape environments.
Well, the good news is when I was walking down Robson the other day and in the Pacific Center Mall, there's a lot of traffic. Obviously, it's probably because of the holidays, but I'm seeing a lot of people, at least here in Vancouver, out on the streets, which is a good thing, I think, and a lot of traffic in the stores. And, the stores are handling sanitation and all the different protocols really well. So I thought that was at least exciting to see. But, again, come January, we know things will start to ease up and we'll sort of hunker down again. So it'll be of concern, absolutely.
So David, your thoughts about your big issue, I don't think we've heard them.
Well, it's funny. I think it's coalescing around what's already in play. I guess I got two things. One is like the story for me, and there were many, but the story for me was the story of independent street retail and food service, the restaurants, and how even the best of those were just placed so much at risk, and maybe not necessarily. I think a lot of policy and support wasn't with clear understanding of the needs of those business, and even more importantly, how important they are to those communities you just described. So I think that's the story that's going to continue on. But for me, um, there was a time when we were all forgetting independent retail. Suddenly that became, when you start to lose something, you start to realize maybe how important it is. But there's a theme that's emerged, and it's kind of in play in my head right now, but it's as you were describing, and the theme is growing divides. And I think, when all this started, there was the catchphrase of we're all in this together. I think as we come to the end of the year, we're seeing just huge chasms opening up. And that could be between the people who are trying to do the right thing and isolate and stay in their homes, and the anti-masker movement. Or it could be, one for me, last January, 2020 January, I was speaking to very senior mall execs around how to create more collaborative opportunities between retailers and malls outside of the lease structure. And there was an interest. I think the divide between tenant and landlord's never been greater. The divide, this notion of essential, non-essential, especially in Ontario right now. As Christine said, I think retail across the board has done a remarkably terrific job at creating safe spaces and following guidelines. You can always, with the numbers that are out there, I'm sure you're going to find one or two that go offside, but it's so rare. And that's a huge divide that's being created for retail, not by retail. Um, and the implications are pretty big on that. Craig now has spoken, and between Christine, you, and the work from home in the burbs, and Craig talking about downtown, where suddenly there's a divide again, right? It's urban downtown versus suburban. And so, I think that's this notion that the haves, or as Gary, you said, the ones who are building their capabilities up and transforming themselves in retail ahead of the pandemic are probably going to come out of this even better. And I think this idea of haves and have-nots, and I think it's both in our society with individuals. I know a lot of people who are financially better off today than they were at the start of the year. And I also know others that aren't and are going the other direction. And that concerns me. I don't know the implications of it, but I always find divisions can happen quickly, but the solution to those, or the healing of them, can take a long time. And I don't really know what the implications of it are, but I would say maybe that's the theme that I've taken away from 2020.
And David, I would add the division between work from home folks and people who go to work at a physical place.
Oh, not just retail, but if you mean like service workers in particular. So where a lot of the spread is happening is it's lower income households where the people are working in hospitals, or janitorial staff and people like that who have to go out. George, awesome example.
Yeah, and to that point, and it's going to be a kind of a touchy one to raise, but those people we call essential workers, and we go clap them and will them on their way, and they're great heroes. Often they have no choice; they have to go to work. Their financial system, their financial situation is highly precarious. They're putting, to put bread on the table for their sometimes small, sometimes bigger family. Maybe dependencies, their parents are, depending on how old they are, who is also dependent on that, but they have to go to work. They don't have too many choices. So it's easy for people who are kind of working from home to, clap them on their way, but and to almost moralize about how, what great heroes they are. But we have to actually recognize those people have no choice often.
And you know what, I know we need to wrap it up, but you have to ask yourself, does this work from home and everything else that comes of it, does that create a much larger gig economy where there really are, your job is not full-time anymore? You know, that can change a paradigm as well, and push a lot of people from a comfort zone to a place that they're not comfort, or they have no comfort, right? Because if you have to get out there and knock on doors virtually to get more work, that makes it tough.
You know, we tend to invite into our discussions from time to time, and we'll be doing so in 2021, industry leaders to just sit in with us. But I'm thinking, as a result of this chat, maybe we should look at bringing someone who's really adept at public policy or understands the intersection of a number of issues where retail is only one microcosm of something much bigger. And I think in the industry, we forget that sometimes.
Well, I think we need to wrap this up, Craig.
I think we should wrap it up, Craig.
We can wrap it up. Thank you so much, everyone. That was an excellent discussion. We're talking a bit about what happened in 2020. Probably need a follow-up conversation about what we're going to be forecasting for 2021. That could be a lengthy and interesting conversation. So thank you so much, everyone. And we got Gary Newbury here, David Ian Gray, Christine Cowan, and George Minikakis. And I'm Craig Patterson. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today.
You have been listening to the Business of Retail podcast, an unflinching strategic alternative to the conventional industry discourse. Thank you for joining us. For more information, please go to www.thebusinessofretail.ca.